Hey everybody, George here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another episode of our Wine Insider series. And today we've got Polly Hammond, who is the founder of the international wine marketing firm, Five Forests. She does a lot of public speaking. She's got her own podcast that we're going to talk about. But I'm super excited to get to hang out a little bit today, Polly.
I'm so glad to see you. Last time I saw you, we were in Oregon, Unified, one of the two. So
Yeah, maybe Oregon.
I
I
know.
think they're like a little
I know.
back-to-back action.
I know.
So I was just
All
commenting
right.
on your soundproof room. I like that. That's pretty cool. I need something like that.
Thank you. Thank you. What you can't see is, so after I finished, I think it was after I finished the second series, I went out and I bought myself a really expensive microphone. And it's like the one thing here that oh, this is my baby, is my very fancy microphone. So yeah, but this is my as I said, beating my head against my wall with the industry padding behind me.
Well, we're going to get into that because, I had this thought the other day about our situation and, from a pure marketing perspective, right? Because I'm getting ready for our sales and marketing conference, which is just coming up in a couple of weeks. And from a marketing perspective, it's like we don't have a product problem, right? Our product's good. Our growers are good. They're growing better grapes than they've ever been able to do in the past, right? Because they keep getting smarter every year. I think our winemaking, our production guys are doing a great job. So it's like I'm thinking about the sales and marketing conference and like really wanted to say to the marketers in the room, like, hey, you guys need to this is your time. We need your help.
Well, I mean, it should be. I agree with you. We don't have a product problem. I think we have a glut of product problem, like that's fair. And I think that it was really easy to sell our product for a very long time. And so, if I have to point one finger at what I think causes the problem, is that there are a lot of wine brands who really want everything to be as easy to sell as it was 10 years ago. And that's just not the reality. So, and I will say, absolutely no disparaging any marketers at all. Marketing changes now all the time. Like the strategy part of it remains the same. What makes good marketing is the same as it always has been. But the actual tactics of it, even with us working in digital, every 3 months, I'm having to sit there and be like, okay, is this still what's going to get the results for our clients that we need? And that's hard.
No, you're right. And things are changing so quickly, right? So to your point, if you're not just embracing the fact that you're going to have to, what you're doing today may not be what the right thing to do even 3 months from today, it's like maybe you need to be thinking about doing something else because it really does change that quickly.
And unfortunately, a lot of the judgment around that comes from leadership, right? So it's the owners or those family stakeholders that they're not the ones really at the front lines of marketing. And I say all the time, we need to have better bandwidth for when things don't work. Like one of the things that we have to do with our clients is that I have to be able to sit down with them and say, here's what we did, here's why we did it, here's how it did or did not work. And sometimes things didn't work, and that can't be perceived as, and I'm not just like trying to bail out my team. When things don't work in marketing, what we actually need to be saying is, well done for trying that. Like, what did you learn from that? How, is it never going to work for us? Do we need upskilling? Like, what would it take to make it work? Because there are things, even if we just look at platforms, it feels like there's a new platform to be on every single week. And I'm right now at a point where I'm looking at brands because like the new series is weirdly on TikTok. I'm looking at all the brands who I see getting mentions on TikTok, and they're not present at all. And I'm like, look, you don't have to be actively producing TikTok content, but you do need to be lurking in a really big way and seeing your own brand in those spaces. So yeah, I think that we need a bit of permission to fail better.
Well, I completely agree with that. And we're working with a company called Dexia, and we're having a great conversation, going through a little bit of our own little workshop. And he said something that resonated with me, that what you said made me think about it. Something is better than nothing. Like, because I think a lot of times people they get nervous, they get afraid, they don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. And I think to your point, it's okay to go try something. If it doesn't work, try something else.
If you've got it, if you have a good reason for it, I think that that's probably the other thing that I would say is no. Well, I won't be hyperbolic. Rarely should decisions be made arbitrarily. If I go to a client, like
Yeah.
I just did a roll out an ad that was for millennials and Gen Zs, but predominantly for Gen Zs. And so what we did was we had our Gen Z team member go in, produce the entire ad, and literally do it in CapCut. They did. So CapCut is a tool for producing videos. For TikTok and Reels and all of that. And it was like, go in and as the Gen Zer in the room, produce it with all the tools that the audience is using themselves, right? And I had to say to the client, I was like, we've done something weird. We don't know if it's going to work or not. Here's the justification for how, why, here's how, and this is how we're going to be tracking it to know if it's working and when we need to pull it. Like, because if it's an ad, I can't just leave it there not
Right.
performing. Like, I need to know, is this working? And if not, I got to pull it down.
I feel like a big part of what you do is um like educating your clients, right? So like you're a marketing expert, you've got, you've done it all. Do you find that you spend a lot of time helping your clients really understand the basics of marketing and why we're doing this and how we're going to measure? I mean, and kind of
I
helping
try
you along.
to. I
Yeah.
mean, I work with a lot of excellent marketers because, like there are some cases where we're brought in and we are the marketing team, and that's fine. In which case, it's the helping the owners understand why we're doing things. But also, when I'm working with a marketer, I want that marketer to be better at their job. And look, there's some practical reasons for this. I always say we are the most expensive people you can hire to do busy work. Like I don't want people calling me to do busy work because what a ridiculous thing to spend your agency dollars on. Like call us to do the things that you can't do. So I've got one client that's been with us for 6 years, and we still have a job, but we're slowly working our way out of a job because 6 years working with the same marketer, she's learning.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. And that's a good thing for that client. So yeah, I'm not living up to my duty to a client if I am not helping them actually grow in their own in-house marketing
It's so funny.
capabilities.
Like so after my last corporate wine job, I worked for Jim Beam when they had a wine division. And before Wine Industry Network grabbed the gear, I did some consulting, in between and it dabbled in a few other things. But the consulting thing was really interesting for me. It was very hard for me because the what I experienced, which I think is not uncommon, begins with, thank God you're here. Tell us what to do. We'll do everything you tell us, right? And then as you start to go through the cycle, maybe they'll do half of what you suggest and they still expect to get the same results, or they'll do, or some version of that, but ultimately leads up to, you know what, George, I think we got it from here. And for
Yeah.
me, like that's the way it's supposed to work. But for me, sometimes that was like hard because I almost felt like I was getting fired. It was like it was a trip. I never got used to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So the part of the work that I do that I really love, I do all the strategy work, right? And that means like the in-house workshops and discoveries. And it means the 70-page strategy document that like I have a no PowerPoint rule at Five Forest. You're not ever going to get anything as a deck. You're going to get it as a proper research document.
Right.
And people say to me when you're going through that like onboarding or that pre-sales process about that, they're like, well, can you give us examples of how this has worked? And I always have to say, yes, here are the examples of how it's worked well. But in probably 50% of the cases, when I am hired to do strategy work, we do all that research. We know everything about that brand. They've got words galore. They take it, it goes in a drawer, it stays in that drawer. It never gets pulled out again. And like that is completely heartbreaking to me. Then like, but you have all the tools, it's right here. Just I've literally written out, just take it and give it
Yeah.
to your marketer and go do it. And dominate the world of wine. But there are still a lot of instances where what they want, and this was hard for me to understand for many years. People just want you to tell them how to do it. They don't want you to they don't want you to tell them why. They don't want to do that. They want the magic pill that's just going to make everything better overnight. And that doesn't exist and doesn't exist in any industry. And it, like wine, I mean, we're one of the most regulated industries in the country. It's so much harder for us than it is all of these people. I look at people who come to me and they're like, oh, someone told me that I can run this kind of ad. And I was like, yeah, if you were selling tires, you could run that ad, but like you legally can't do the things that you're asking me to do. And unfortunately, your nephews told you that you can, right? So
Yeah, no, I mean, and then layer on top, it's just how competitive our industry is, right? So it's like if you're not out there working hard all the time, but I can see your frustration. It's like you basically, it's like your playbook, right? Okay, guys, here's the playbook. Just follow the guidelines, and you're good.
I know it is so funny. I actually just for the first time in 10 years, so we've never been that sort of like lead gen downloadable kind of agency at all. And I finally this year it was like, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to give, it's like 30 plus pages. I'm going to write down the things that I say to brands over and over and over. You want the playbook? Here, this is your starting playbook. Take this and run with it. Good luck. I wish you well. And not in a frustrated way, but more like this is a very hard time for our industry. And if any of us have the ability to not gatekeep information that can help our industry to grow, we need to be collaborating. We need to be sharing that. I mean, I've spoken at your conferences many times.
Yep.
This is really the thing is that you go to conferences and you need these don't need to be pitches. These need to be I'm going to tell you how to walk out of this room right now and do something that's going to affect a positive change for your bottom line.
Yeah, no, and that's what people are looking for. But it is frustrating when they leave these sessions with some really actionable takeaways, and then they don't take any action. And you're like,
but then there are the ones who do, and we love them. And I've always said I can spend 20 minutes talking to a brand and know whether or not they can actually succeed in their goals. And I bet you can too, George. Like you look and you're like, okay, these are go-getters. And Michael Bourne, who, Mike and I will have discussions behind the scenes where we're like, we like them. They, you tell them what needs to be done, and by the next meeting, they've done it and they're on the ball and they're like completely engaged in this whole process. And God, those are the best clients.
Sometimes though, I've had a couple of situations which were really awkward where you've got, the playbook is solid, the product is solid, right? You've carved out the path, the niche, but they don't have great players. Right. So it's like you can be a great coach, but if you're missing the players.
Why do you think that happens? Don't growl.
No, I'm not. I was like, I'm
not this one. Yeah.
Your little friend there. Part of it, I think, is maybe just, I'm trying to say how I want to frame this up. Letting people go is very hard. I think sometimes it's like, the devil and I think sometimes you'll keep people around simply because you're afraid it's the devil, and they're afraid of making a mistake, when they're trying to trade up. But I think when I think about business, to me, a lot of it is about like thinking like we're a sports team and you constantly have to be getting better. So if you can get a better second baseman, your team is going to get better. If you can improve on your left fielder, your team is going to get better. That's not easy to do. It seems a little bit cold-hearted, but sometimes it's like team first.
Do you think that that's just in marketing, or do you think that's across all categories of work within wine?
No, I think you can make a case across all categories. I mean, whether you're like looking at your finance team or your vineyard crew or the folks in your tasting room, I think it's across the board. You should constantly be looking to improve. Now I feel bad saying it out loud. I feel like a very cold-hearted person, but I do feel
I'll say this. I've had this conversation with the Irani team. So Pauline Vicard and Felicity Carter. about how one of the things that's really challenging is that part of our work life is that we eat and drink together, right? So you think about when we go to conferences, there's this, oh, we're all friends, we're all going to sit around and we're all going to eat and drink and go out to dinner and all of this. And so that kind of blurs the line between, is this a professional relationship? Is this a personal relationship? And I think that that can actually be really hard.
Yeah.
On the marketing side of things, what I feel like, and I'm like absolutely no finger pointing, is it's really hard to know where to go to get good advice. And some of this does come back to things are changing so rapidly. Some of it comes back to people hanging shingles when they have like absolutely no skills. But I do think that you can have a really engaged leader who wants the very best for their team and still not know how, like, where to get the knowledge to coach them to be better. And that's sad. Like that I don't know, that's just sort of heartbreaking to me. I mean, I mentor a lot of young marketers because I want them to be good at their jobs and to go. I mean, there are other things. So I'm here I'm in Spain, and we have the joke in the European wine industry, which is, winery family has a son and the daughter, and the son becomes the next generation of the winemaker, and the daughter goes into marketing. Or we've got marketers who come from a sales background. Like, there are all these ways that people enter marketing. Like, I didn't come from wine at all. I came from marketing and had to learn wine. But you have a lot of people who know wine who then take over this marketing job. And like things that we really talk about also is how nowadays everything is marketing. So someone who's a social media manager wears a title, wine marketer, and somebody who's in PR is a wine marketer. And so again, understanding, well, what is the job and what do you have to know to do the job correctly? And what was the brief that you got when you were hired to do the job? So I think maybe it's just about getting to be a little bit clearer in our communication. From the owner, what are you expecting from the new hire? And from the new hire, well, what exactly is it that I know how to do and where I need to go out and be upskilled?
Yeah, it was something this is something maybe you think of another question I wanted to ask you. Your perspective on the relationship that the marketing team needs to have with the sales team, right? Because I've been in situations where it's been a pretty fractured relationship. The marketing team, when I worked for Beam, I used to say, had this like little way of saying it's like that, the marketing team lived in the perfect world, right? So we were in Healdsburg and we were brainstorming and coming up with all these cool plans. And at that point, I was in trade marketing. So I kind of migrated over some of us to go between what I used to call the perfect world, right here, our offices in Healdsburg, and the real world was where our sales guys lived. And I would even include the tasting room people in that real world scenario. Yeah. And it was astonishing to me, because I didn't come from a corporate background, how little sometimes the communication flowed from the real world back to the perfect world, right? Because it's so critical. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I see it in so many ways. I agree with you completely. So in an ideal world, it's like the partner desk. I think that marketing and sales need to be sitting side by side, and they need to be communicating about exactly these issues, and they need to be supporting one another. Practically, where we see the biggest problems since 2020 have been in channel conflict between the two. Like, since we suddenly have direct to consumer, what we have is internally a team that is trying to sell a product or an experience direct to consumer. And sometimes they are competing even in terms of pricing with your trade team, with your actual sales team, who are out there trying to do the work in the retail market. And that is, that one is one of the first questions that we asked often when we get in with brands who do have large wholesale distribution. There's a lot of space where, when we talk about, for instance, the tasting room staff, where they absolutely are the heart of it, right? Because the tasting room staff are the people who are there with the customers. Yep. And the number of times that you hear stories like, well, a customer walked into the tasting room, didn't know what ads were running, didn't know what was happening within a market. And the tasting room team is like, we had no clue. How are we supposed to support that? So I think that if you had to sort of have that anchor between the two, I think really that needs to come down into the tasting room. And what's so hard about that is a lot of the times our tasting room staffing is they're younger, they maybe don't have as much experience in the industry as would be ideal for them to sort of hold that space.
Yeah.
The other thing though about marketing and sales that I think when you're operating in sort of large distribution where your sales team isn't even a part of your team. So like we work with a lot of global brands who bring their wines into the US. And that means that they've got third parties who are representing them in the market. And that information doesn't feed backward to their marketing team. And examples that have come up over the years are restaurateurs who don't want to take a wine because they don't like the labels. They don't like the name, they don't like the labels, they don't like something about the packaging. Well, if that's not feeding back to that marketing team in-house, how do they ever correct that? The other side of it is that marketing, I can go on and on and on about this. Marketing may be handling things like your email list, your advertising, your social media, your landing pages, dynamic content, whatever it is. And they might actually have the numbers that could help support those sales teams to go out and get more placements because they can say, look, this isn't, just we're a small family winery. We want you to showcase us, but rather we have the data that shows that when we advertise in Chicago, we see, the largest lift that we get or whatever. Hold on, I got to put the puppy down. So yeah, I do think that they need to be talking to themselves. And I think that technology is actually a major win for this. So something like Slack, right? So my team has lived on Slack for all of these 10 years. With Slack, you can actually automate things like stand-ups. So just a text-based stand-up so that everybody has an easy way that in their own time zone and working hours, they can report in, just check in once a week with what's going on.
Yeah, no, we try to do that, but I really like your thoughts about it. Like think of it like almost like a partnership desk, right? So I love that. And I think the brands that are succeeding, they have systems in place that support that level of communication. I also couldn't agree more about the role that the tasting room people play in really understanding, the consumer, how consumers are reacting to whatever, right? Because they're the only ones that are actually dealing face to face with the consumer, pouring those samples day to day, but they often get, dismissed as the lowest level employee in the operation, right? It's like an upside down world.
I know the college kids who come in and work summer jobs in the tasting rooms. And we actually have a bit of work. So on the supporting sales side, there's a lot of times that we have to actually produce collateral or visual asset, video, audio, internal podcast, all of those kind of things. Like internal podcasts are another phenomenal way to bridge that space between tasting room, front lines, your sales staff, your marketing, and even your leadership. And so we end up having to do a lot of that. And what we know, if you go back to sort of how natural human behavior, nobody ever wants to look stupid. So if you can provide the content and the training that allows those, let's just say, younger frontline employees to feel really confident in their knowledge about a wine or a brand or a story, they are so much more likely to recommend you. And when we do things like customer persona building for brands, we always say, yes, it's great. We've got these D2C personas that we can build, but we always have B2B personas. We always have that one person who's at the retail front line that we have to think about them as well as the people who are along that distribution chain. And because they're our customers too, they're the people that 22-year-old in some Total Wine somewhere is actually super important to our brand, and we can't forget about them.
No, I've not heard about doing an internal podcast. I'm sure like some of the bigger companies have been doing that for years, but that's brilliant, right? What a great way to really get, it's such in my mind's eye, I can almost see it like a much more effective way of tapping into whether it's a tasting person or the sales guy in charge of the Northeast, and just get them on and just say, hey, what's going on out there? What are you seeing? How are people reacting? What do they think about the new program? If it was up to you, what else might we be doing, right? And just kind of create like an atmosphere or assuming, a situation they feel comfortable talking about, what they're seeing, and what advice do they have for the company? I love that idea.
Yeah, and it's so absorbable. If you're commuting into work, make them bite size and that they don't have to be like an hour long podcast, although you could do that, 15 minutes that you listen to every Monday that's just like tapping in. I will go back to one thing when we're talking about kind of leadership and marketers and then something like this podcast. I know that a lot of my clients have had really difficult times with staff since 2020. Like this just seems to be pervasive. Do you hear this as well?
Yeah, I think
with staffing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so building in the paid time for learning is so important. You're going to produce a podcast. If they're listening to it, they're on the clock. Like, I do think that that's something, and that we've got this romantic ideal that, oh, everybody, we work in wine, and therefore, of course, you're just gonna want to give up your commute to listening to my podcast as opposed to listening to whatever else you want to listen to. Like, it is still part of the job, and if they were selling widgets, that would still be on the clock.
Yeah, I think you just need to, if you're doing it, go all in and make sure it's compelling and it's worth the time, and it's an investment. I mean, that's the thing. It's like it's an investment in your team and in your brand, your business, and your people, right? All right. So usually when I do this, I usually start with like, wanting to understand somebody's journey, but we just kind of started getting into it. And so, but I want to go back to the question, my very first question, which was to understand a little bit about your journey. How did you graduate with a degree in international relations and French, right? Is that right?
I did. That's right. I think you're the first person who's ever brought that up in an interview. Yeah. So I graduated from USC when I was 20 years old. I wasn't even old enough to drink, with degrees that I really loved, but it didn't serve me so well when my new husband and I decided that we were going to leave America and move to New Zealand. And so I had to, and also it was nice. I mean, like I was a grown up and suddenly I could learn whatever I wanted, not what my fancy family wanted me to learn, right? And you have to figure that was 98, 99. It was Napster, like it was in the Napster era. And so I was in New Zealand, far from home, and I started taking all of this that I learned from IR, like in international relations. My field of specialty was conflict mediation and negotiation. Okay. And I always called that the art of getting people to do what you want them to do. And so I took that, and then I started reading more and more about behavioral economics. So this thing that became known as behavioral economics, which are all the crazy reasons that people make decisions. And that led into me basically learning how to combine the internet with all of this persuasion and what eventually became marketing. Like, I don't have a degree in marketing. I just knew how to persuade people to do the things that we wanted them to do. That's what I was educated in. And my husband, I actually will ask you this offsides. So my father-in-law worked for Southern for 35 years. And so we just had all of these friends who were in the alcohol industry, particularly in the New Zealand wine industry. And I had a business that was doing the same thing, but in a different industry. And they would come over to my house, and I would spend Saturday and Sunday nights, and they'd bring good wine. And I would explain to them, well, how this whole thing that was the internet worked and why maybe they should be considering it for wine. Yep. Until finally I got to a point where I was doing so much of this like free advice to wine brands that I thought maybe I should turn this into a business. And that was 10 years ago, which is completely bonkers. Like, that does feel like yesterday. I studied under Tim Hanai for, I think it was like an 8-week program on wine business, because I needed to understand the cost models, because I didn't know anything about that. And that was brilliant, like super, super helpful. And then even doing that, we all, like, I'm so honest about this. I thought it was a retirement job. I was like, maybe someone one day will actually pay for this, because wine was so disinterested in anything digital. And I used to go to conferences and I would be like the one person at the conference who was talking about anything that had to do with the internet. And you just tell it's like, woo, in one ear, out the other. They wanted nothing to do with it. And then as you can imagine, March 2020, that completely changed.
Yeah.
And we got really busy, and all those people were like, who is it, that bimbo who's been talking about wine and the internet for all of these years? And have pretty much stayed super busy. So that's the trajectory. I still get to use an awful lot of the conflict mediation and negotiation stuff these days, which surprises me.
Tim Hanai's such a cool guy. He just really goes, walks to the beat of a different drum, right? And he's out there and he's doing it. And he's just one of the most unique, impressive people that I've ever had a chance to meet, honestly, in the wine industry.
I feel so lucky to have done that like early, very important bit of work with him, because he said in those classes, 10 years ago, he's like, look, it's really easy for the industry. I'm going to paraphrase him. Sorry, Tim, it's not going to be your exact words, but it was basically, it's very easy for the wine industry to glorify these artisanal brands who, vintage variation. And if it's a bad year, we just won't produce, yada, yada. It's like, it takes a lot of winemaking skill to produce the exact same wine every year at the exact same price point with millions and millions of gallons. Like, that was really the thing, was that he did not want us coming out of that course with this glorified view of artisanal wine brands. And that made me such not a snob about actual quality. Like, great winemakers are not always people who've got multi-million-dollar Napa properties where they can choose not to release a wine because it was a bad year.
Yeah, no, so my background, some of my other parts of my background, I worked for Corbel early on in my career. And while I was there, we bought Kenwood and the Beam, on the Beam side, we had Clos du Bois, we had some major brands. And I could make the case that those winemakers that are responsible for the 500,000 case run, the million case run, don't get the respect they should, compared to the guy who's producing, 125 cases of this hillside Napa Cab. With all due respect to those guys, to your point, they have a lot of options in front of them. Like, they can literally not release that wine, but that big company, you've got to make that a million case run taste pretty much like it tasted last year. Because that's what
100%.
And you got to manage your costs along the way.
And at this price point, at the lowest possible price point you can come in. Yeah. Look, I agree with you entirely. And it made us very not snobby about our work. Like, I know that there are some agencies that are like, oh, we only work with super premium brands. And I'm like, nah, screw that. You know what I want to work with? I work with hard workers. Like, that's it. I want to work with people who respect their craft and work really hard. And those are my most beloved clients.
Well, I'll ask you another question. So you've got clients in, across continents. What do you see as like, what are the successful brands that you've worked with, regardless of where they're based? What do they have in common?
This is what I talked about at your conference in December, George. What do they have in common? So, God, that's putting me on the spot. What do I think they have in common? I think they have a curiosity to learn. Like, I honestly believe that whether that's to explore, to learn, to, is it what our production looks like? Is it what our consumers look like? That if you're willing to say, ooh, who are these people who are going to be turning 20, 21 in 5 years? Yeah. What is it about them that I should know? Just sort of that interest. So I think that's it. The other thing, and I'm actually going to give a big shout out to Janie at Brooks Wine. So like Janie, and she and I have done conferences and I got case stories and the whole thing. Janie is such a good client, because if I come to Janie and I'm like, Janie, I got a weird idea, but I got some data that I think supports it. I want to try this thing. She looks at me, she's like, absolutely, go for it.
Yeah.
And, we've got all the data backing us up, but like that willingness to be like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll try that. Why not? That's amazing. I've got other clients who are very, very rigid. And that's, and it's hard to get things up and down the line. The worst clients, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this.
Yeah.
The worst clients are the one with layer upon layer of middle management. And those are actually the ones that do not stick around as clients with us for like, we don't stay on, because in digital, you have to be able to move pretty quickly. I mean, we really saw this in 2020 and 2021. And if I have to go up and down a chain of command and it's going to take 4 weeks to get one ad approved,
Yeah.
that's not going to work. So, so curiosity, willingness to learn and adapt. I do also say, and this has to do more with like agency client relationship, the most important thing between us and clients is how we communicate. Because if you can communicate openly about, from a brand side, what you're trying to accomplish, and from an agency side, what you need at any given moment, without any kind of frustration, because sometimes that can happen. If you can actually sit down and discuss those things, you can be the most amazing team, that you'll ever come across. And that, it's a gift.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, because I'm really curious about your thoughts on this. We talked a little bit earlier about, the internet and the internet's impact and why, wineries need to be embracing this. I mean, I literally remember when, I was in the wine industry before we had websites. And I remember like some people kind of going, I think we're going to hold off on that. Like, we don't make that much wine. So we're not, we don't want to like build up a website. We're going to, all of our wine's going to get, it was like some weird, weird thinking. Fast forward, right? Everybody's got websites now. A lot of them are like, like almost like templated websites that you can get from, Commerce 7 guys will help you out with that. And
from us, I mean, we've got them too. Yeah, sure.
Do you, are the role of the website, is that changing? I mean, are they getting like going to be more interactive? I mean, are they, or they you just need to have the basic information?
Yeah, no. So I love this question. I love this question because I'm such a contrarian. I've worked with the internet for so long that Michael and I laugh that one day I'm just going to launch a site that's just going to be like a white background with plain HTML on it. Our relationship to websites have changed so profoundly. Like, there was this period of time when they were really a toy, right? Yeah. Oh my God, all the bells and whistles and everything that we can do. But now it's a tool. Everybody's used to working with the internet. And so though the bling, I mean, this is my take, one person, whatever. The bling needs to go away. What we need fast, so performant, right, is the word. We need super fast sites. Middle of Napa, I can't load a lot of these websites that have all this blingy shit all over it, right? So we need sites that effectively work like a really good book, right? They've got known user patterns. We know how to navigate our way through it. We can find what we want. We can get the information we need. We can make the purchase. We can get out the door. So I think that websites are super, super important, but I don't think that they're important for the reason that a lot of people who haven't spent a career working on the internet think they are. So like, the ones that have all the animations on it, it's awful. It's just, it doesn't work, and nobody wants it anymore. What people want from your website, besides a really good user experience, part of that really good user experience is the sense that, and this comes from the data. I mean, all of this research that we do all the time is this sense of this brand sees me and knows why I'm here.
Yeah.
And can help me do the job I need to do as quickly as possible. So a lot of that, technical words for it are hyper personalization at scale. So it's things like personalized blocks in Commerce 7, or you can also get that in other channels. It's better segmentation within our email marketing. It's more relevant ad delivery. So it's across all channels. People don't want their time wasted with bling. They want to feel like that's a space that's crafted for them. And you can do that now.
Well, you're not alone, because I find myself heading down the same path. It's just like, you need to have the bait, it needs to be easy to navigate, intuitive, and just provide the information that they're looking for. We don't need all this animation.
But that's the part that's interesting, right? The information that they're looking for. And what is it, right? What's the information that they're looking for? And this goes all the way back to that early question. When we talk about why wine has such a hard time with digital, we go back into the history. We were not, with the exception of tasting rooms, where it was not, the big channel for all of our wine sales. We weren't at the front lines. We weren't the people who were having to understand who those customers were. So something like customer personas, which I have a whole framework that I built out for wine brands, specifically because wineries don't build accurate customer personas. They rely upon something that at this point is like 14 years old. It was the Constellation Genome Project. They do things like Timmy the teetotaler and, the Polly the Pinot drinker and George the Gewurz lover, or whatever it is. They've got these sort of like bar charts and all of that. And in order to answer the question of how do I make a website work for my audience, well, I have to know who my audience is. And this one problem ties into, or this one thing ties into so many problems that our industry is having. Something like millennials and Gen Z. Well, I've been talking about that for 10 years. What do we do? We're like, how do I sell wine to millennial? Well, there are a whole lot of different kinds of millennials. Like demographics as a segmentation tool is pretty much dead unless you're talking about, are they of legal drinking age and can they afford to buy my wine, right? So if I had the magic wand that I could just like wave over my industry and make everything change, it would be let every brand know who their consumers are. And once they have that, then they can actually make brilliant marketing decisions across any channel. They can even know what channels they have to be on. I had one of my best wine brands that didn't have a website for years. They ran everything through DM on Instagram because that's where their people were and they could. And I mean, I didn't even push for them to have a website, and I sell building websites for a living.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that you're absolutely right. I think a lot of times with people have, with that, those decision makers with wine brands, whether they're huge or small, sometimes they're still trying to be everything to everybody, right? And versus to your point, it's like, okay, who's your target consumer and what are they interested in? And how do you position yourself to get their attention? You don't need to worry about everybody's attention.
I know. We make things that we want, like, why do we make a new wine? Owner decided we wanted to try it. And I'm like, where are you going to sell it? Like, who are you going to sell it to? So yeah, it's tough. I mean, I worked with artisans of all different kinds before I worked in wine. And I think that there's this real beauty in working with people who have this emotional or romantic attachment to what they produce. Like there is something very wonderful because we love it, right? And they love it and they're emotionally invested in the success of those brands. But the challenge of it is there's also a lot of confirmation bias. Like when you love what you're doing, you don't really care if it makes a lot of money and you're absolutely willing to listen to the little echo chamber that surrounds you, that everything that you're doing is perfectly right. When we're distanced and we're making widgets in some factory, well, nobody's going home and being like, I love those widgets so much that I don't care if they never sell.
Yeah. But I think that there are a lot of people like that you described that, launch brands, 20, 25, years ago that they love what they do, but I think some of them just running out of steam. You know what I mean? Because it's such a grind, and better than anybody. It's like, starting with a good product. Those are just table stakes, right? You have to have a good product, but really you've got to be willing to be out there working and selling all of the time, or it's just not going to work. I mean, people don't know that
it's work.
It's hard.
Just because you're a tech bro and you made all that money and you could buy that land, guess what? Get ready to work. It's work. Yeah.
It's hard work. All right. I want to pick your brain a little bit about, what's your take on social media now? Because when it first kind of like it was like the greatest thing ever, but sometimes it feels like it's too much. And what are your thoughts?
Okay. My personal thoughts.
Yes.
I hate social media. I hate everything about social media. I think that the world is going to look back and say that the social media era was one of the worst things we ever did for civilization.
Yeah.
So that's my personal thoughts for brand building. I think that, again, going back to who your consumers are, don't try to be everywhere. Like, that's really important. Pick your spots, do good with it, be as efficient as possible with it. And don't expect too much out of it. That's probably it. I think that I've always said, I've never seen a bottle of wine sold because of an Instagram post. It's good for sort of like a second point in a customer journey. So someone's heard about you, or they're looking at a bottle, or they're in a restaurant or whatever, and they want to find you. They're very likely to go and look you up on Instagram or Facebook or wherever they're looking. But the nature of even how people are discovering brands is actually really changing. And this is where it is important for this discussion. We do have, again, we've got more and more research coming out all the time that people are discovering brands through social. What social is the challenge? So we see, weirdly, I just talked about this, Pinterest is suddenly like becoming big again amongst Gen Z. That completely floored me to find that out. Again, Gen Z is finding a lot through video content on social media. I've started to see, again, this is a bit anomalous. I've started to see an uptick in brands that have older men, and by older men, I mean mature men, so Gen Xers and up, following them on social. That was something we never used to see at all. And then, of course, advertising. Meta advertising is one of the strongest ad channels for our clients, at least. And I hear it from my colleagues as well. Like, it works so, so well. So again, looking at, well, are we talking about organic? Are we talking about paid? Are we looking at who our audience is? Where are they at? Another one that I had to eat my words on this. Influencer marketing is something that I was really down on for a very long time, that I was like, no, don't do that at all. And I've had to change my tune on that. Like, the what an influencer is and what people expect from the influencer has changed a lot in the past, say, 5 years. So we're no longer looking at that sort of like old school Kim Kardashian endorsement sort of thing, but rather people who you trust, right? Someone who you've developed parasocial relationship with them. You believe that what you love is something they love, the value systems mesh, and then you are willing to consider something. You see this a lot, in fact, across YouTubers these days. So yeah, that's kind of a broad stroke. I I use it for paid ads for client. I will say that Five Forest, with very rare exception, and it's only when we're doing a lot of other things for a brand. I don't personally recommend that brands hire an agency to do their organic social. My experience with it has been that it's too distanced. So you lack that sort of contemporaneous feel of what's happening on the fly or anything behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But I also, one of the things that I noticed, because now you just got me like going on this, one of the things that I noticed that kind of makes me sad is that there are a lot of wineries who are putting all of their marketing eggs in the organic social basket. And there is an opportunity cost in that, right? Like, it takes time for someone to produce all of that content, and that time might be better spent making better personalization on your homepage or
Yeah.
segmenting your email list.
Somebody I think is doing a good job. I really like what they're doing. Are the folks over at Dry Creek Vineyards, Kim Stair Wallace. I think she and her team do a really nice job of continuing to kind of give their followers the peek behind the curtain, right? Which is one of the things that people love when they come to visit wine country and they visit your winery, and maybe it's a day where you're doing a vineyard tour, or you're pulling some barrel samples. I think as in that way, it can be a really effective tool, just continuing to kind of nurture that relationship.
Yeah.
That
And I agree. I think the behind the scenes content is a great use. And in fact, when you're doing that, ideally you're looking at things like reels or stories, like you're looking at something that's got more of a dynamic content to it as opposed to static post. And then there are other places that I think social media can work really well. So let's say that you've got low inventory number local events, right? Going out on social is a great place to put that because you might not have the time or the money to run that through advertising. And it's just a great way to sort of like blast something cheap and easy out the door. Dry Creek, again, I've seen their post on that. I will now be paying more attention to that. Me and all the listeners are now going to go look up Dry Creek Vineyard and see what they're doing.
Follow them. I think you'll like it. And of course they do it.
Yeah.
They do a great job. This has been a really good conversation. So and I know you're busy, but I've got a final question I wanted to ask you. And
is it about my new series?
Yes, let's talk about that first, and then I'll ask my question, because my question's a closing question. So talk about your series and how people can tune into it.
Okay, so at 50 years of age, I decided that I needed to put my face back on the internet. It took me 2 years coming out of the last podcast series to actually like regain my podcast mojo. Except there are a lot of wine podcasts out there, and I was like, well, what's the thing that we're always doing anyway that I think adds the most value for my clients? And that is, I am always reading non-wine marketing news. So consumer insights, advertising news, social media changes, anything about data. And I said, okay, well, instead of doing the hour-long interview style podcast, I will do short and sharp. It's about 6 minutes, and it goes out once a week, and it is non-wine news for wine marketers, and it's called the Wine Marketers Radar. And so it's things like this week, what did we talk about? We talked about a follow-on. So a Heineken has got a flip phone that is AI driven, that it flips face down when someone says cheers. But now they've actually come out with a whole continuation of this, which is Joe Jonas and a handful of other sort of celebrities and influencers imagining the world if nobody was engaging with their content. And it's this, video series of them trying to promote a notion of social off socials. Or there was another one. Again, I loved this so much. It was Del Real Food, Latin American food. Right. They ran an AI campaign, and AI in this case is Abuela's intelligence. And so it's it's a retro call center that's manned by the abuelas, and the abuelas are giving their life wisdom and their cooking advice. And I was like, oh my God, like this is so something that wine could take on board, right? Like everybody on the planet is like AI this, AI that, AI something else. And this is nostalgia, and it's cultural memory, and it's human connection. And I just want it to be something that's like, here's the digest. If there are 4 things that are happening outside of wine in marketing this week that could make you a better marketer or give you a competitive edge, here's what it is. Run with it. And even though I just said they shouldn't be on all social media, I'm testing it. I've put it out on everything. It's on podcasts and TikTok and YouTube, and it's on the Five Forest website. It's not on Meta or Instagram yet because I just can't stand those channels.
So did people should they just go to the Five Forest website?
If you go to the Five Forest website, you can find it under the blog.
Okay.
Super, super easy. Yeah. And scroll down to the footer, and there's even the link to the category. That's the Wine Marketers Radar.
All right. Then people in the audience, go do that, follow that. But now,
and can I tell you something about that before you do your closing question? I have had the most amazing sort of like life-changing insight. And this is a girl thing. I don't know. It's been really interesting to be at a point where I'm doing content and I'm putting my face out there, and it's all so casual and non-judgmental. Like there was the era when it was, if you're going to do something, you've got the hair and the makeup and the clothes, and you're like, it's really like, I'm getting ready to go to the conference. And we're now at a point where it's low fidelity head talking to the camera. And it's wonderful because when we say things like, every week it's the growth of video. I can talk about every single week. There's more data about the growth of video, and wine brands don't want to embrace video because it's perceived as super high production, and it doesn't have to be anymore. And just phenomenal how that part of social media has changed.
I actually think that the more, overproduced the content is, the less effective it is, right? And I talked a little bit about my in between my last corporate job and Wine Industry Network, grabbing a gear. Part of what I did was a lot of video marketing. So I had a team that would do all the shooting and editing. I was kind of the producer. We probably did 100 winery videos or more, or association videos, and they were really well done, and they were polished and beautiful. And I would not use any of them today, right? Just like, because
Wow.
this is so much more real, right? So people see right through that. And I agree with you. Like, I love this. I just like having conversations that are natural,
Yeah.
real. All right. So now I have two questions for you. So you talked about like trying to look at how other industries are embracing their marketing and embracing the changing times. Are there any marketing trends that you're seeing right now that haven't really kind of migrated their way into the wine industry, that wineries are going to look back on maybe 2 or 3 years from now and go, I should have been paying more attention to this?
Yeah. I think that right now the whole world is trying to come to grips with AI. I mean, I understand that. And what I see, so this is the first one. I see wine brands talking about AI, but they're talking about it at a very superficial level. And I'm not saying that I think that AI is going to be the thing that's going to change the world, but what I think is going to happen is that 3, 4 years from now, wine brands are going to be saying, I wish that I'd taken the time in 2025 to actually engage with AI on a meaningful level. So not producing, bad images or whatever, which by the way are terrible for the planet. Don't do that. But actually learning how to program AI to get what you want out of it, because it can be a very powerful tool. So I do think that kind of like the websites that we were talking about, looking at AI as a tool and not as a toy is something that strong brands are doing right now. And then, I think video is, of course, a really big one. And it's so funny. I had the first meeting where someone looked at me and said, when does Gen Alpha start drinking? And I was like, oh, because we're always behind the 8 ball. We're still talking about how to sell wine to millennials, and millennials are like in their 40s now, right? So I always think that we need to be planning. We plan our plantings years in advance. We need to be planning our marketing and looking at our marketing and looking at the audience and the experience of that audience much sooner than we are, because I mean, I can go on and on about this. I will say those kids in a very non-demeaning way. Like, all of those kids coming up have lived through a lot of trauma, and it's our job as marketers to be their advocates and to understand that. And that means that we have to be paying attention to them.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you're the first person that used kind of an example from a grape growing mentality of saying, because you're going to put those vines in the ground, right? You're kind of thinking, okay, I'm thinking Pinot's going to stay hot, for the next
5 to 7 years.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We said something. Oh, I have a little recommendation for anybody who's listening along the lines of the AI conversation. There was a series of 3 episodes on Masterclass about AI, and the whole messaging was about, it's a tool, and like it or not, it's not going away. And but the 3-segment class really kind of took a deep dive in of how you can really use this as a tool. And I started, because I played with it like a toy in the beginning, and after watching that, I use it like it's a tool. It helps me when I plan these insider series. It just helps what used to take 2 or 3 hours in preparation and gets it down to an hour-ish, and it's something that people have to be.
I'll tell you one of the best uses of it, that like and this is not a deep like use of it, but just something that anyone can do. So SOPs. As we've grown, I've had to embrace writing SOPs.
Yeah.
Well, an SOP for me, I can pick up my phone, use good old Chat GPT, talk out what the process of performing anything. So like I've got an SOP for the wine marketer's radar, right? For every bit of production and content that has to happen. And literally just say, organize that into an SOP. And I know that that's so superficial, but something like that used to take a long time to sit down and be like, okay, type out all of this. I mean, we use it for, honestly, like we use it for a whole bunch of stuff. I use it for the deep research model is phenomenal, I will say. I mean, you always have to check it, you always have to have a fact checker, but you have to have that anyway. But yeah, I think that I also use it laughingly for debitchification. That is like those days when I'm like, can you just help me say this so I don't sound like a bitch, and get that fed back to me. But there's a lot of like actual use cases just beyond that. But we do, like I said, it's great for things like digging into your data, right? That's such a good example of it. And I think that as long as we're treating it like a mid journey kind of, it's going to produce blog featured images for us. We're gonna fall behind.
No, I agree with you on that. Debitchification. I'm going to write that down. That's good. I need to get. My wife and my two daughters. I think I'll be using that term.
That's really it. Yes.
I think. So just to wrap it up here, there's a lot of marketers, winery owners out there that are afraid. They're feeling stuck. There's just so much uncertainty out there. But they have to keep going. What advice do you have for them?
Thinking about that.
Think about it.
And I want to give a good, honest answer on that. Well, now's a really good time to actually look at where you're spending money, what you're producing, and why. I think that's really it. I think this is the reality check because, every brand needs to be working as efficiently and as productively as possible. So I can give you a good example. This is the year that we've been called in to do a lot of marketing ROI audits, right? So when it's flush, when you got money coming out your ears, you're like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. Maybe I'm not getting the best return on ad spend, but you have a lot more, like you forgive a lot more with your spend. So now is a really good time to be looking at what are you producing and why? What are you selling and why? What's not depleting and why? Where are you, where are you spending money that you don't need it, that maybe you should be spending money a little bit more wisely? We have to, God, what is that old word for when we have to retrench? Is that what it is? So I mean, I do think that this is a great opportunity for brands to become more resilient by engaging in better practices. Now, I'm sorry to sound pitchy. I also think it's a really good time to look at who you're working with, because if you're working with someone who's not producing the kind of returns that you need, maybe you need to be working with someone else. I will say something though, like going back to the websites, I've always said to my team and publicly, I'm some ways like the worst person to be selling websites, because I firmly believe that you can have a butt ugly website and and really good understanding of your audience and do fine. A beautiful website, gorgeous social media images, glam is never going to overcome not knowing who your people are. Never. And so now's a great time to actually look at who is walking in the door, who's buying my wine, because if they're there right now, they're committed. These are the people that you want to know. You want more of them. Find out who they are and go out and discover all the rest of them.
Well, I think that's perfect advice. And I know we've experienced that here, at Wine and Chanel. 2024 was an unusual year. It was the first year we didn't get bigger, and forced us to do the same thing. I always talk about like kind of going through like the, three phases of grief, where it was like I was in like denial at first, like, okay, it's an election year, everything's going to work out, and doesn't matter who wins. And then I went into like, I feel like a state of depression. I'm like, oh my God, what's the world is, they're gone crazy, and he's gone crazy. And then I finally just embraced the idea of like, this is what it is. And it's time for us to take a good hard look at our business and how we're spending our money. And I think that's perfect advice. I think you're spot on. And I like to believe that 2 or 3 years down the road, or whatever, however long it's going to take before we kind of figure out who's still here, who's not here, who did all the things that you just recommended, we'll look back at this time with a lot of pride, right? Because I think the folks of us that wind up coming out the other side are going to come out stronger, more efficient, I imagine more profitable.
Well, this is not the first time this has happened. Yeah. I mean, I think that we really have to acknowledge that. And it's not going to be the last time that this has happened. And we do have to look sort of at history of what were the behaviors that did lead to greater acquisitions. So, there's a great marketing is a good example of one of the things that gets cut from a budget when times get hard. And any marketer can be like, why in God's name would you do that? Like, if there's one time that you actually need to really like dig into good marketing, it's when business is a little bit more challenging. So I think you're right, though, that, what I hope comes out of it is that when this phase is over, the brands who remain are stronger and wiser. I know that sounds just insipid, but like we have to hope that the brands have learned how to be great business people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that they will. Polly, thank you for spending an hour with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It was an awesome conversation. I think you're terrific, and I love the work that you're doing, and people should tune in. Go to the Buy Forest website, tune in on the podcasts.
It's really free. Absolutely free. Go for it.
Yeah, and I love that you're looking at other industries, right? Which we don't do enough of looking at other industries and what they're doing right and what we can adopt and make our own. Thanks everyone in the audience for being with us today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and be sure to like the YouTube channel for more Insider series in the future.